From humble mountain roots in North Carolina to speed records that still stand today, this modest champion was the first title holder in a decade of change in NASCAR. Today on NASCAR Past Champions, we look at the quiet champion, Bobby Isaac.
Early in his career, racing the short tracks of North Carolina, Bobby Isaac's fiery personality was well known. But once he harnessed that energy into the race car, he became one of the hardest chargers the NASCAR circuit has ever seen. Hi, and welcome to NASCAR Past Champions. I'm Mike Joy. The race fan might best remember Bobby Isaac for those high-wing Dodge Daytonas, but his fellow competitors remember him as tough to beat in no matter what he drove. And whatever it was, it went very fast. Bobby escaped to the racetrack to seek refuge from a difficult childhood. He worked in a textile mill as a boy, looking for means to support the large Isaac family.
He came from a rather large family. His father died when he was very young. He was about 5 when his father died. And his mother died when he was 12 of cancer. So he was one of the younger children. So some of the older siblings pretty well took him in and helped raise him. So he had a very difficult childhood.
His first glimpse of Hickory Motor Speedway, sneaking through the fence to watch, confirmed his desire to race a car.
He was very good at associating himself with people who had cars and could sponsor him and so forth. And he would supplement when he had to, working in the textile mills, but he basically tried to make a living racing.
Bobby started to groom his skills around the Carolina short tracks, building a reputation as a hard charger with a short fuse, but a huge desire to win.
In his early racing days at Hickory Motor Speedway, he either won, was going to be upside down, or there was going to be a fight.
It was pretty wild, from what I understand. Many times he would tell me that he had to win the race, because he had to win the race to get enough money to be able to get back home. So that was a driving force for him, was to be able to win or do well. And I know many times if he told me that if he were running anywhere past 4th, he would just pull in and quit.
I would compare him with Sterling Marlin. They drove hard, didn't mind banging into somebody if you need to get where you need to go. And although they, I think, both very fair, but still very intense at what they were doing.
During this time, Bobby hooked up with area legend Ralph Earnhardt. Isaac drove Earnhardt's car, but that didn't mean the two friends weren't on-track rivals.
And they would be going at it and hitting each other side by side or whatever. And in one race, they got into it, stopped on the backstretch. They were running first and second, stopped on the backstretch, got out, got into a fight, and I think both of them kind of got thrown out of the race that night. But that's just kind of the way they were.
Ned Jarrett and Ralph Earnhardt both had kind of taken an interest in him. I think some of their leadership or training in the years had helped. He was awfully good on dirt. He would remind you a lot of Dale Earnhardt when he was driving dirt. And that talent just grew, I guess.
With Earnhardt's support, Bobby was able to set aside his frustrations and begin to see positive results. It was the start of a series of breaks that would catapult him into the NASCAR spotlight. With a jump start from Ralph Earnhardt, Bobby Isaac's career began to take off. His first big break came from Bonneville in 1961. With a decent car and some money behind him, Bobby began to perform. But he'd only stay with this team for a year and a half. Bobby's performance didn't go unnoticed. Legendary mechanic Smokey Unick tapped Bobby to pilot his Chevy in the 1963 National 400 at Charlotte. Bobby impressed Smokey so much, he recommended him to friend Ray Nichols, who put Bobby in his Dodge in 1964. As Bobby ascended through the ranks of NASCAR, he formed a lifelong bond with fellow driver David Pearson.
When I first met him, he was bashful or whatever. Of course, I was too at that time, you know, but they said he wouldn't talk to people, so I said, well, I'm gonna make him talk to me, you know, and I just walk up and talk to him and ask him questions. And of course, he'd have to answer them, you know, but we come out to be real good friends.
One of the amusing stories about Pearson and his great friend Bobby Isaac, they were qualifying at Bristol. So Isaac went out to qualify, and he got up to speed and was making his first lap. And someone jumped out of those bushes in the third turn and went. And Isaac slowed down and went on around and came around, and NASCAR said, "What'd you slow down for over in the third turn?" And he said, "Someone waved me to slow down." And they said, "Well, it wasn't us, and your time stands." Well, Isaac had a hair-trigger temper, and he was furious. And because he felt that NASCAR had ordered somebody waving to slow down for some possible problem. Well, it was David Pearson that jumped out of the weeds. Isaac found out who it was, and he got a tire tool and chased Pearson all over the infield at Bristol. And I'm sure he would have done some serious damage on David's noggin if David hadn't gotten far enough ahead of him and crawled under a truck and hidden for about an hour until Isaac cooled off.
Everybody's got to have a best friend, and he and David were certainly that. And it seems like a difference and mix there, but it clicked from day one.
Both of them wanted to be race drivers, but they wanted to make money at it. It wasn't just like to be famous. That didn't matter to either one of them. What mattered was making some money.
Heading into 1966, racing legend Junior Johnson had just hung up his helmet and chose Bobby to pilot his cars.
He was so excited about being able to drive for Junior, and so honored that he was the first driver that Junior had after he retired. They were not successful, and that really grated on him. He finally quit. He chose to quit again because he knew he wasn't being successful, and he didn't think that he was doing justice to the team, so he quit.
Bobby would not be without a ride for long. In fact, his next team would create the circumstances Isaac needed to become a champion. Dodge called Bobby Isaac in 1967, looking to team him with the K&K Dodge, fueled by Nord Crosskopf and veteran crew chief Harry Hyde. Bobby and Harry clicked immediately.
They did communicate good. They had, they kind of talked the same language, you know. They, I guess, even with the difference in their age, they had the same phrases, the same terms, it just sort of clicked right off, you know. And then after they worked together for a while, they kind of knew what each other was thinking, you know. So it was, once we got a feel of what Bobby liked in a car, and once he got some confidence in the team, it just, you know, after that it was just automatic, it seemed like.
He knew what made Bobby Isaac tick, and he understood his driver. He understood his driver as a person, and he understood Bobby's idiosyncrasies. He knew how to get the most out of him.
They were very much alike. They both wanted to win. They would do whatever they had to win.
Driving for an owner like Crosskopf was an eye-opener for Isaac.
They lived in Indiana, and I know the first time Bobby went up to visit with them, he came back and he said, "You would not believe where these millionaires live." He said they live in the bad part of town, and that's where they'd started, and they got their business going, and they became very successful and really became millionaires. Never moved, and ran their business out of their home. So, and he was always very respectful of that they did not let that success go to their heads, that they stayed very down to earth.
Bobby's performance over the next 3 seasons made the Big Wing Daytona a favorite, as the K&K Dodge won 20 races. In 1969, Bobby set the single-season record for pole positions with 20. After 3 successful years, the K&K team focused on the championship going into 1970.
I think 69 taught us that we had to keep the car there and keep it as consistent. And it was pretty much planned going in, and it was a planned process of what we had to do to the car and to keep stuff from falling off of it. Make sure what you put on was put on correctly, or make sure there was no bad welds, or make the pit stops good and clean, not to, you know, try to make as few a slip up as you can. That's about what it amounts to.
With 5 races to go, Bobby went to Charlotte with a 50-point lead. 3 weeks later, Harry and Bobby went to Rockingham determined to clinch the title.
And he knew where he had to finish at Rockingham to win the championship. And so Harry slowed him down, and at one point he was actually driving on the inner circle of the racetrack. He hated every second of that. And so he won the championship, and when I saw him after the race, I thought he was going to be so excited and happy about that. And the only thing he could talk about was how he had to drive so slow in that race to be sure that he had finished in the points, because he would have been trying to win the race.
The race before that, we boiled all the rear end grease out of the rear end. And we kept putting rear end grease in it, and it kept boiling it out. We couldn't figure why. Somehow, there had been some foreign material got into the grease that we didn't know about, whether it be accidentally or on purpose. But I remember when we got to Rockingham, we went through every piece of that car race day morning. We spent most of that Saturday and most of Sunday morning, and from tires to hubs to the fuel cell to the transmission to the rear end, everything on it, we made sure nothing was loose. And that was a pretty intense day. At the end of that day, I forget exactly where we finished, but when we knew we had the championship, it was a pretty good relief. It was, because we could just see it blowing up right in our face. You know, I guess everybody does, but we was fortunate and come out on top.
Bobby had reached his lifelong goal of becoming Winston Cup champion, but being at the pinnacle of the sport came with it some big demands. Bobby Isaac had finally realized his childhood dream. He was NASCAR Grand National Champion in 1970. On November 24th, Bobby and Harry Hyde set a world closed course speed record at Talladega. Bobby was atop the motorsports world, but was barely prepared for the demands of stardom.
And he hated every minute of that. He did not like personal appearances. He didn't like having to go do speeches, sell products, those kinds of things. That was not his thing. He liked to race.
He didn't seek publicity, didn't seem to care that much about it. In fact, he would avoid it more times than not, even after he won the championship. It's too bad that he didn't really have enough education or enough desire or whatever it was to be able to take full advantage of the accomplishments that he had on the racetrack.
I'm not sure whether Isaac in the latter part of his career was really that interested in the type of things that you have to do in Winston Cup, the time that it takes, and he was a very private person. You just didn't see him on PR ventures. He didn't do that kind of stuff. He was a little more private than that, and he got caught in a scene where he had to be a good PR man also in racing. And I don't think Isaac ever fit that pattern.
And he was never the outspoken type. I don't think he liked being in the public eye that much. He just wanted to race.
I think maybe he just wanted to back away from the limelight a little bit. He was sort of bashful too. You know, he was backward, and maybe he didn't like that being pushed out there in front, in front of a lot of people. He was sort of a laid-back type person, as far as outward personality-wise.
The following year, Dodge became frustrated with rule changes in NASCAR, and team owner Nord Krauskopf decided to expose his K&K team to new challenges. He sent Bobby and crew to the famous Bonneville salt flats in Utah to rewrite the record books, and they did just that.
Well, we had never been to Bonneville, never seen it, didn't know anything about it, and we took 2 truckloads of stuff out there and spent 2 weeks and literally worked ourselves to death.
Nord Kraskoff had walked into the motel room the night before and said that he had 5 $1,000 bills in his hand, and he said, "I will give you a $1,000 bill for each speed record that you break tomorrow." So Bobby went out and set 8.
Some of the records we broke had been standing since 1953 when we broke them. I would have thought they would have broke that record by now, or at least some of them, but from what I hear, they haven't. So it's, yeah, it is impressive. I never would have thought they'd lasted this long.
With the success of the number 71 Dodge, Kraskoff decided to add a second car to his stable. That decision didn't set well with Bobby, who decided to move on after 37 wins in the K&K Dodge.
He was very frustrated with some of the things that happened during that time when Chrysler sponsored the cars, because, you know, they decided they didn't want to cooperate with NASCAR, and they pulled all the cars out for a year, and he had to go race USAC, and he wasn't happy with that, and he was kind of a person who wanted to be his own thing, and he didn't like people telling him what to do, and especially if it was things he didn't want to have to do.
Bobby moved on, eventually hooking up with Bud Moore. In 1974, while leading the race at Talladega, Isaac mysteriously pulled off the track and quit.
Well, what happened there was, I can't think of the boy's name, was a real good friend of Bobby's. That he had a wreck going into turn 1, I think it was, and he hit the wall pretty hard, and the boy lost his life. And what they did, they got the boy out of the car, got the driver out of the race car, and had him on a stretcher. And instead of taking him on, we were on the pace laps riding around there. And, you know, all the drivers watching us and wondering why that they had never took the guy and put him in the ambulance and left with him. So they run a couple of laps, you know. And this sort of got on Bobby's mind a little bit, and he finally called me, and he asked me about him. I said, well, I don't know for sure. He said, well, they're still laying on that stretcher. Why hadn't they taken him away? And so we must have run maybe 8 or 10 laps under the caution, and then finally he run a couple of 3 laps, and he called me and he said, I can't go no further. He said, how about getting me a release driver? And so we pulled him in, put Cuckoo Marlin in, and he finished the race.
And on the way back home, he said, I just quit. I said, what do you mean you just quit? He said, when I was out there running, something just told me to get out of that car, you know, that I needed to get out.
He had a feeling, he had a tremendous feeling come over him that he should not be doing this anymore. But he honored that feeling. He had that premonition, and he knew that he needed to just not be there. And it really bothered him that everybody talked about that afterwards, and they'd all talk about how this big voice came to him and those kinds of things. And I think he really wished he hadn't shared with people that feeling.
Bobby Isaac continued to race, but would struggle the rest of his career. 4 years after winning the Grand National Championship, Bobby Isaac found himself looking for a ride. He regrouped, racing at his home track of Hickory. But in 1977, Bobby collapsed during a race at the Speedway and passed away that evening.
I was at the race at Hickory when he died, and we had played in a golf tournament, and my partner and I went down to the pits to talk to Bobby before that race, and he stood there and he said, you know, he said, this is a shame. He said, I've won a NASCAR Winston Cup championship. He said, I've set speed records to Salt Flats. Won 37 races, or how many ever races that he'd won. And he said, here I am, here competing, and can't compete at a high level with these guys who are trying to get their start in auto racing. He said, something is not right. I felt so sorry for him because I knew how he had to feel inside, because he was a proud man and appreciated what he had been able to accomplish, but he had spent what money that he had trying to resurrect his career.
It was just like I lost somebody, you know, a family member or something, because we were just as close as me and my brother and my sister, anybody, you know, so, because we were together all the time.
In a career that spanned 15 years, Bobby Isaac proved determination could overcome any setbacks life handed you.
He was a quiet individual, hard to learn to know, but once you did learn to know him, and he took you on as a friend, you had a friend for life. I mean, he would give his life for you if he needed to. That's the type of person that he was.
He's the quietest champion, or the quietest race car driver, probably, or one of them that I've ever been involved with. And he was that way his whole career, but he was just my idol. He was the kind of guy I liked and followed and wished that I could have been like if I drove a race car.
He was a very loyal person. If he decided that you were his friend, you were his friend for life. If he decided that he didn't like you, I don't care what you did, he would not like you. But he was a very honest person. He was pretty, what you saw was what you got. And he didn't put on airs, and he didn't try to act like somebody that he wasn't. Very shy, didn't say a whole lot of times. But when he was in one of his moods, he could be the funniest person that you've ever talked to.
Bobby Isaac is remembered around his hometown of Catawba, North Carolina, with an annual memorial race at his home track, Hickory Motor Speedway. But from the high banks of Daytona to the Bonneville Salt Flats, Bobby Isaac blazed a trail of speed that keeps his name alive in the annals of racing forever. For NASCAR Past Champions, I'm Mike Joy. Thanks for joining us.